It is 2:18 on the morning of November 21st, 1970. The Mekong River Delta is dark and quiet below as a formation of aircraft crosses from Laos into North Vietnam at low altitude without lights, navigating by terrain reference and dead reckoning. There are 56 men in this formation. They have been training for this mission for 5 months. They have rehearsed the approach, the assault, the extraction, and every failure contingency dozens of times on a full-scale replica of the target built at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. The target is a prisoner of war camp approximately 23 miles west of Hanoi, a place called Son Tay. The mission is to land inside the camp, subdue the guards, and get those men out. At 2:18, the assault force is on approach. What they will find when they reach Son Tay will redefine the mission. And what the mission will accomplish, despite finding no prisoners at the camp, will reshape U.S. Special Operations doctrine for the next half-century. This is the command structure. Let's break it down. By 1970, the Vietnam War had entered the phase that its political managers called Vietnamization, the accelerated transfer of combat responsibility to South Vietnamese forces, while American troop levels were drawn down. President Nixon had inherited a war that was politically unsustainable domestically, militarily inconclusive operationally, and strategically ambiguous at every level of analysis. By late 1970, approximately 450 U.S. military personnel were confirmed or believed to be held as prisoners in North Vietnam. Many had been in captivity since the mid-1960s, having been shot down during the air campaigns over North Vietnam. And their treatment, systematic torture, isolation, and degradation, had been documented through the accounts of returned prisoners and was a growing political and moral issue. Son Tay prison camp was approximately 23 miles west of Hanoi in Son Tay province. By the intelligence assessments of mid-1970, it held between 50 and 70 American prisoners of war, one of the largest concentrations in any single facility outside Hanoi. The intelligence picture was built primarily from overhead imagery collected by SR-71 Blackbird reconnaissance aircraft. The imagery revealed a facility whose layout was thoroughly documented: the compound walls, the guard barracks, the prisoner cells, the perimeter defenses, the behavioral indicators, laundry in a specific corner, movement patterns inconsistent with guard-only operations. A maintenance of prisoner areas formed the human evidence underpinning the assessment that prisoners were present. The intelligence assessment had a significant limitation. It could not definitively confirm that prisoners were at Son Tay at the specific moment the rescue attempt would be made. This gap between the quality of the intelligence picture and the actionable certainty required for a rescue mission is the central analytical tension of the Son Tay operation. It was the gap that produced the operation's most significant result. The force landed inside an empty compound. The decision to plan and authorize a rescue attempt at Son Tay was driven by a convergence of humanitarian, military, and political imperatives. The humanitarian imperative was straightforward. Men who had served their country in combat were being held in conditions constituting systematic torture, and the government had an obligation to act on every viable opportunity. The military imperative reflected a specific concern that the ongoing peace negotiations, continued drawdown of forces, and uncertain trajectory of the war created conditions in which individual prisoners might be moved, die in captivity, or become unavailable for exchange. The concern about the camp being relocated, as events would demonstrate, was entirely justified. President Nixon was briefed on the mission planning in August 1970 and gave his authorization on November 18th, 3 days before the operation. Secretary of Defense Laird was specifically concerned about the intelligence gap, the absence of confirmation of prisoner presence at the moment of execution, and required the Joint Chiefs to confirm their assessment before authorizing final execution. Laird's concern about intelligence reliability was well-founded. It reflected a sophistication about the operational risk that was not always present at the senior political level. Brigadier General Donald Blackburn managed the operational planning, a World War II guerrilla leader who had spent decades developing U.S. special operations capability. Blackburn selected Colonel Arthur Simons to command the ground assault element. Simons was a Special Forces officer with extensive Vietnam experience and a reputation for planning exactitude and personal leadership under fire. Brigadier General Leroy Manor commanded the joint force overall, responsible for the air element, the rehearsal program, and the integration of the joint force. The planning team operated under strict compartmentation. The operational security of the planning phase, maintained for 4 months across a force that ultimately numbered 56 assault personnel, was itself a significant institutional achievement. The Son Tay assault force was organized into 3 functional groups. The assault group, designated Blue Boy, would land directly inside the Son Tay compound using an HH-3 helicopter, breaching the walls and clearing the prisoner cells. The support group, designated Green Leaf, would land outside the walls and neutralize the guard force and the perimeter defenses. And the command group, designated Red Wine, would provide command and control and remain available as a reserve. The aviation element included HH-53 Super Jolly Green Giant helicopters, the single HH-3 that would crash land inside the compound, and the A-1E Sky Raiders, providing direct fire support. The integration of this joint force, Army ground operators, Air Force aviation, Navy diversion forces, and intelligence support made Son Tay the most complex joint special operation the United States had attempted to that point. Son Tay was located within the dense air defense network built around Hanoi over the preceding decade. The SA-2 guideline missile system, supplied by the Soviet Union, operated by experienced North Vietnamese crews, was the primary concern for the aviation element. And the Son Tay camp itself was guarded by approximately 45 North Vietnamese Army soldiers. The intelligence picture of the guard force was detailed, guard positions, rotation patterns, weapon emplacements, all mapped from imagery. The SR-71 Blackbird flew from Kadena Air Base in Okinawa on missions that transited North Vietnam at altitudes and speeds that made interception impossible. Imagery analysis is a skilled discipline that goes far beyond the identification of structures. The analysts tracking Son Tay developed a forensic familiarity with the compound, tracking changes in physical configuration, identifying patterns of human activity through shadow analysis and object recognition, comparing sequential imagery over months. Post-mission analysis would establish that the Son Tay prisoners had been moved in July 1970, 4 months before the raid, because of flooding from the Songkhon River. The move was not a response to any intelligence breach. It was a routine administrative relocation in response to an environmental condition. The imagery used to validate the target was collected before the move occurred. The MC-130 Combat Talon, equipped with terrain-following radar and forward-looking infrared, was the navigation lead for the helicopter formation. The helicopter formation followed the Combat Talon by maintaining visual contact with the lead aircraft's infrared visible formation lights invisible to the naked eye but visible to night vision-equipped aircrew. The HC-130 tankers provided the in-flight refueling that allowed the HH-53 helicopters to complete the round trip from Thailand. The refueling was conducted at night, in formation, at low altitude, over hostile territory. The successful completion of the refueling was a prerequisite for the entire mission. The training and rehearsal program at Eglin Air Force Base involved the construction of a full-scale replica of the Son Tay compound. The assault force rehearsed the entry sequence, the crash landing of the HH-3 inside the compound, the neutralization of the guard force, the clearance of the cell blocks, until the movements were reflexive. The force conducted 14 rehearsals of the full operation. The assault was consistently completed within the planned 27-minute window. One significant problem was identified during rehearsals. In a night rehearsal, the helicopter carrying the Blue Boy element landed at the wrong location, at the mock-up of the secondary school, rather than the Son Tay compound. The error was identified and corrective procedures were implemented. The problem would recur operationally. The intelligence lead began to develop in late 1969 through the systematic tracking of the North Vietnamese prisoner system. By early 1970, the NPIC assessment of Son Tay had reached a sufficient level of confidence to bring it to the attention of the senior military leadership as a potential rescue target. The assessment was not unanimous. There were analysts who questioned whether the behavioral indicators were sufficient, but the weight of the evidence supported the prisoner hypothesis. General Blackburn presented the Son Tay concept to the Joint Chiefs in May 1970. The key planning decisions were each the subject of extensive analysis. The deliberate crash landing of the HH-3 inside the compound, a planning solution to the geometric problem that the compound was too small for normal landing. The timing of the operation, a pre-dawn strike in November, driven by the monsoon weather window that allowed visual navigation. The diversionary Navy strike, designed to saturate the North Vietnamese air defense system's attention during the critical minutes of the approach. 14 rehearsals, day, twilight, and night, in that sequence. The navigational error in rehearsal, helicopter at the secondary school instead of Son Tay, was identified and corrective procedures implemented. November 21st was selected as the execution date based on the meteorological window for reduced cloud cover over the Hanoi region. The raid force departed from Udon Royal Thai Air Force Base at approximately midnight. In-flight refueling of the HH-53 helicopters completed over Laos. No incident. The Navy diversionary strike launched from Task Force 77 at approximately 200 hours, striking coastal radar sites and installations, drawing North Vietnamese air defense attention toward the east. The formation crossed the North Vietnamese border from Laos at approximately 2:15, below radar, in darkness, in radio silence. At 2:18, the A-1E Sky Raiders took up their fire support positions. The HH-3 began its approach to the compound interior. The approach was precise. The HH-3 executed the deliberate crash landing inside the compound walls. Captain Richard Meadows and the Blue Boy element dismounted and began clearing. The cell blocks were empty, no prisoners. Outside, the Greenleaf element executed its plan as designed. The guard force was neutralized. The fight was brief and one-sided. One element did not go as planned. Colonel Simons's helicopter landed at the secondary school, not the Son Tay compound, repeating the error identified in rehearsal. Simons recognized the wrong location immediately. He ordered his force to fight through the facility. An estimated 100 to 200 personnel were killed in the engagement. Simons extracted by helicopter to Son Tay. 5 minutes elapsed. Mission momentum maintained. At Son Tay compound, the finding was confirmed. No American prisoners. Negative items was transmitted to General Manor, orbiting overhead. Extraction ordered. The extraction from Son Tay was executed in good order. The HH-3 was destroyed by thermite grenades. The formation returned through Laos to Thailand. All aircraft returned to Udon. No U.S. personnel killed in the raid. Post-mission analysis established the timeline. Prisoners moved July 1970 due to flooding from the Songkhon River. The move was not a response to intelligence of the planned rescue. Within weeks of the raid, North Vietnam consolidated the dispersed prisoner population into the larger Hanoi facilities. The consolidation was driven by recognition that the dispersed camp system was vulnerable to targeted rescue operations. An unexpected consequence? The Hanoi facilities provided conditions of collective living that the isolated smaller camps had not. Prisoners could communicate. They could maintain chain of command. Now they could provide mutual support. James Stockdale, who received the Medal of Honor for his leadership of the prisoner community, stated explicitly that the Son Tay Raid's effect on prisoner morale, the knowledge that a rescue attempt had been made, it was among the most significant events of his captivity. The Son Tay Raid is frequently characterized as a failure. The mission found no prisoners. This characterization misses the analytical distinctions that make the mission a significant case study. The tactical execution was, by any objective standard, a success. A joint force of 56 operators penetrated 23 miles into one of the most heavily defended airspaces on Earth, executed a compound assault with precision, neutralized the guard force without losing a single member, and extracted in good order, all within the planned timeline. The intelligence failure was real, but of a specific type. The intelligence picture had been accurate as of the time of collection, but had become stale between collection and execution. The distinction between tactical success and intelligence failure is analytically important because the doctrinal lessons drawn from each are different. Son Tay is one of the foundational events of modern U.S. Special Operations doctrine. The Joint Planning Architecture, the Manor-Simons model of an Air Force Joint Force Commander integrating with an Army Ground Commander, became the template for subsequent Joint Special Operations planning. The rehearsal doctrine derived from Son Tay was particularly influential. The principle that a force preparing for a complex joint special operation should rehearse the complete mission against a full-scale replica of the target environment to the point of reflexive execution became a planning standard. This rehearsal standard was directly applied in subsequent operations, including the Desert One rescue attempt in Iran 10 years later, though that operation illustrated that rehearsal alone cannot compensate for other systemic failures. Eagle Claw's failure at Desert One drove the institutional reform that Son Tay had begun. The creation of the Permanent Joint Special Operations Capability, Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, the 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, and ultimately JSOC and USSOCOM. That would bring together the service's special operations forces under a unified command and training framework. The legacy of both Son Tay and Eagle Claw is institutional. 2 operations, one successful in execution and one catastrophic in result, that together drove the creation of the modern U.S. Special Operations Enterprise. The mission that failed to rescue anyone may have done more to sustain the prisoner population's psychological survival than any other single event of the war. The demonstration that the United States had attempted a rescue, that the government had committed a significant military capability to the recovery of its prisoners, was itself a message to the prisoner community that was more sustaining than the success of the rescue would have been. The Son Tay Raid is a case study that resists simple characterization. It is not a success story or a failure narrative. It is a demonstration of the complex relationship between tactical execution, intelligence accuracy, operational design, and strategic consequence. The tactical execution was exceptional. The intelligence failure was real and consequential. The strategic consequences were neither simple nor predictable. The Son Tay Raid illustrates a principle that recurs throughout military history. The most significant consequences of an operation are often not the ones that were planned for. The mission was designed to rescue prisoners. It did not rescue prisoners, but it demonstrated a capability, drove an intelligence investment, produced an unintended improvement in prisoner conditions, and launched a doctrinal evolution that has shaped U.S. special operations for 50 years. Structure determined what was possible. At Son Tay, in November 1970, what was possible was more than it appeared. You have been watching The Command Structure. Subscribe if you think in systems.